Jen Cloher is a songwriter and performer living on unceded Wurundjeri land in Naarm, Melbourne. Over the course of 5 albums, Jen has established themselves as an incisive songwriter, dynamic performer, and an outspoken advocate across a wide range of issues. Many Australian musicians, particularly in Naarm, would think of Jen as a mentor, in some cases directly, such as through their many years steering the indie label Milk Records and facilitating DIY workshops for self-managed artists. But also indirectly, as Jen has never shied away from speaking up in the public sphere on behalf of things they deeply believe in. Jen has won awards and toured the world, but in recent years has been immersed in a personal journey of discovery, retracing their matrilneal Maori heritage, spending time in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and learning and championing Te Reo Maori language. Just a few weeks ago, in their typically generous and unfussy way, Jen casually dropped a Google Doc into the world. It's called the DIY Releasing Music Handbook. It's a free handbook of knowledge that provides not just current practical advice on how to release music, but it also challenges artists to think about why they're releasing music, not just how. Perfect timing to have a chat with Jen for this podcast. Why make music? This podcast was recorded on Wurundjeri land in October 2024. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the custodians and the traditional owners of this land that my family and I are lucky enough to live on. That's something about quality, not quantity. So I'm doing a podcast every week until the day I die. Someone said the other day, how many more episodes are you doing? And I said, just forever, right? Like, isn't that what you do? Yeah.
Especially with this kind of conversational format.
Yeah.
You know, if you were doing I don't know, the kind of podcast I'm making at the moment where you follow people around and try and get a sense of place and mix in their music and tell a big story, then I wouldn't want to be making one a week.
Okay. So hang on, you've got a podcast too. So everyone really does have a podcast, right? I'm like the last person to have a podcast.
Well, maybe. I mean, my podcast, I didn't necessarily think was going to be more than 1 season, but I decided to make a 2nd season, and it's called Everybody's Trying to Find Their Way Home, and it's conversations with both First Nations and Maori songwriters about writing and performing in their language.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's something I've become interested in. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll go and talk to other people about it.
Yeah. You spoke with amazing people for the first season too, like Lou Bennett and
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah, truly. Like everyone was incredible. And so, yeah, I'm sort of in the process at the moment of finishing up interviews and beginning the editing and mixing process. So hopefully out next year, April next year.
Who's in season 2? Like, give us the hot scoop.
Who's in season 2? There's a few legends. Shelley Morris. We go up to Kakadu to her sister's homelands and hang out there. And Whitty Markle Black, who is, one of the leaders of, I think, that movement to sing Te Reo Māori in non-traditional, so like bringing it into jazz and, hip hop, and, she did that big work in the early 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess this is true of a lot of creative practice, but just thinking of that specific example, like there is often this feeling that you're sort of discovering something for the first time and then you realize someone has been trying to work it into the culture for 30 years or 50 years or 100 years. You read a book and you realize, someone thought about these, what feel like extremely modern, important innovations in the 1930s or in, ancient Greece or whatever it might be, or thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago.
Yeah, I think, this is something that we'll probably talk about today, as we get older in the music industry, world, community, whatever you want to call it, you sort of start to think about how am I leaving? Am I leaving the music world, industry, community in a better place?
Mm.
And the reason why I'm having these conversations with, I think, leaders, young and old, in the world of music, songwriting, who are also knowledge holders as far as, their tribal groups, is I want to make sure that these conversations are there for the next generation and also of the highest quality. So I don't just want some crappy recording that I throw up on YouTube. And there's a place for that. I'm not in any way being...
You're on one of those right now, by the way, Jen.
Yeah, I think there's a place for that.
Yes.
There's also, I think, something about really honouring somebody's story and giving it the production and the love and the context that it deserves. And so that's kind of the work that, everybody's trying to find their way home is really archive. I'm being a bit of an archivist.
Mm.
I want these stories to be there for future generations because you never know who needs to hear your story.
Yep.
Because I've been like, oh, my God, listening to people's stories who are no longer here, and so grateful that someone took the time to have that conversation with that person because I really need to hear it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, we're going to chat for about an hour, even though I would like to sort of spend 3 or 4 days or a lifetime talking to you, Jen, as many people would.
We could get married and then you can spend your life speaking.
Was that a proposal?
Yeah.
Oh, my God. All
Isn't
right.
it people get married so they can just talk to that person forever?
I mean, I am married, but maybe we can figure out some kind of arrangement because I'm kind of into it. Can you have like I could have an intimate life partner, if I can just use that word as a placeholder, but also then a conversational life partner. Well,
they're called friends, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
But I think
why don't we just be friends?
we can just look, I'm here for it. But I think you marry I think the only reason why I'd marry someone is because I'm fascinated by their brain and their thoughts and everything they have to say. And I just want to get first dibs on their time. What you reckon?
Yeah, I feel that. We got married when I was 22, so I just can blame youth on the fact that we went down that very traditional pathway, and it turned out all right for us. It's like buying a house and having kids were much more like life-altering things for us as a couple than throwing a big party for our friends.
Yeah, well, I guess kids and homes, finances and children is
intertwining all that
bigger
stuff.
Commitment. Yeah,
it's wild. So, look, I was always going to talk to you for this podcast / project, whatever this is. And, when I saw what I want to get into eventually is I want to talk about the Google Doc that you posted pretty recently. It's essentially an collaborative document that you've written, although it is, I noticed that you've put it up and you've said, please, everyone comment, annotate this. I think that process hasn't quite started yet. So for the time being, at least, it is unfiltered Jen Cloher advice from a career as a DIY self-managed musician, but in a way that I love. All of the stuff about, when should you release a single, what kind of distributor should you get, that's all in the back end of the document, and all the stuff we're going to talk about is what is the bulk of the document, which is the things everyone needs to hear or remember about what music actually is and why it's important, and maintaining your own relationship with it. So before we break some of that stuff down, and I will say, just go read it. Stop the podcast now and go read it if you want, because by the end of this, you will be inspired to read the doc. But before we do that, this podcast is called Why Make Music, Jen? So huge question up front, and I know you can take it. It's when you first started making music, maybe when you were a kid even, why were you doing it? And how has that changed over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land I'm a guest, but I was born on these lands, and I'm sure that the music that I make has been informed by being born here and then returning here when I was about 28. And I returned to Naarm, to Melbourne, because I didn't know anyone, but I heard that the music scene was good here. And I'd come from Sydney. I'd grown up on Kaurna land in Adelaide because my parents moved there to work. And then I auditioned for NIDA. I got in and I did the 3-year acting course when I was very young. I thought I was very old. I was 19. I just turned 19 when I started, and I was like, oh, God, really
mature age student. How am I going to understand these kids?
I literally felt that way. Like I'd sit in class and just be like, oh, God, let's move on to the serious stuff. People here to work. I remember saying that, like asking my class if they were actually here to work, to do the work. I was a very serious person. Anyway, spent 3 years at NIDA. That was a whole education.
Were there famous people? There's always famous people there. Was there a famous person there?
Yes, I remember like walking down hallways and like Kate Blanchett walking past and, just having those.
And you were like, get to class, Kate. What are you doing?
I remember seeing Kylie Minogue and Michael Hutchence in the foyer once and like nearly losing my mind. They weren't at NIDA, but I don't know, they were there for some reason. Anyway, I digress. While I was at NIDA though, and it is interesting that I should bring NIDA up, I went and bought my first guitar. It was a secondhand acoustic guitar, and I started to write songs. And a lot of the songs I wrote was in the girls' change rooms at NIDA because I was a rebel.
Right.
And I decided that I didn't, for good reason, I didn't like NIDA much. And they were really trying to do that thing that they say, which is true, like break you down and really build you.
Oh,
and
horrible.
I was like, no.
Yeah. That actually doesn't work for many people, that approach.
Yeah, I think I needed a lot more encouragement, and I think I didn't realise that. Anyway, long story short is I left NIDA and I was much more inspired to write music, and I continued to do that, and I wrote music. I played in a lot of bizarro bands in Sydney, and then I moved to Melbourne and I was like, right, I'm serious. I'm going to write. I'm going to finish writing an album. I'm going to record it, and I'm going to like start my career.
Well, hang on. Before we get to that, I want to go back to, what was it, the change rooms at NIDA.
Aye.
And you've bought the acoustic guitar, and you're writing a song.
Yes.
Why?
Oh yes. Why?
Why did you buy the guitar, and why, and what were you getting out of it at the time?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'd always loved singing ever since I was a child, and I think it's one of the purest forms of expression. I think dance and song, and also when you think about their role before they were commercialised and turned into genres and marketed and promoted, they were part of everyday life. They marked events, they marked ceremony, they marked initiation, they marked death, life, marriage, all sorts of things, and our bodies don't forget that. We may not have context, we may not grow up knowing exactly who we are or where we come from, but our bodies, our DNA still holds an understanding. And so when I sang, I felt something changed in me and shifted in me, and it felt really good. And I wasn't telling someone else's story. I think I started to write songs because I realised I could tell my own story, that I didn't have to read a script or play covers, that I could talk about my, my teenage feelings, which was a lot of unrequited love.
Yeah. But that's an amazingly powerful combination. It's the kind of discovery of like a physical resonance that is literally like tens of thousands of years old that you've inherited as a human being. So you play music and sing, and your body just vibrates because it's doing a thing that it's meant to be doing. Like that combined with like, oh, and I can now tell my own stories. Maybe, I guess in the context of NIDA, where you're there to ostensibly become an actor, where the entire job is to be other people and tell other stories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is fun.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
It's really fun. And I was okay at it. Like I got into NIDA. I survived.
Yeah.
Came out, I did a bit of acting. But I think the other thing that I loved about music was I didn't have to wait around for someone to give me a job.
Mm.
You know, I could go and write a song and record it and perform it, and I think that gave me this sense of autonomy and self-determination that the acting world at that time, like we didn't have actor, producer, writer, directors.
Mm. Yeah.
Like back in the early 90s, which is when I was at NIDA, that hadn't happened yet. It was still very like the auteur, the director, the actor, you get, and then that's really changed. And I think had I grown up, in a world where you could do it all and there were examples of that, then I probably would have stayed in acting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Well,
like a Greta
combination.
Gerwig or something like that. I'm trying to think of someone who's in that kind of mold where like all of their earliest work was them telling a story that they'd drawn out of their own lives and they made the whole thing. They wrote it and started it. And yeah, less models, I guess, of that back in the day.
That's it.
Mm.
So I think music was just an easier vehicle, and you could get a band together and go and rehearse in a room and record music, and yeah, it just felt really good. And it was another way of telling story, because I think essentially I was just always fascinated in story, in hearing it and telling story as well.
So at risk of skipping a lot of really important ups and downs, where are you at with it now? Like, what is music? What's the role of music in your life now? Why do you continue to do it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I'm at a place in my life. I'm 50 and I've been making music, sort of the same cycle of like writing, recording, releasing, touring for the best part of, 22, 23 years professionally. Like, people pay to come and see me do it. And there's been a really big shift in that I don't really know what the next thing looks like. I don't know if I want to make another album, and it's not because I'm like, it's all broken, I'm leaving the music industry. There's no sort of ill feeling about it, but I just don't dream into that space in the way that I used to. And I think the big shift has been as I've been learning my matrilneal language, which is Te Reo Māori, the Indigenous language and people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I've been learning a lot of waiata, so, traditional Māori songs, some of them written, a couple of years ago, that are designed for everyone to sing them, who Māori or not, they're created and you can sing them. And so this year I've been meeting up with a group every Tuesday night of other Māori and takatapui, so queer, LGBTQI+. And we just sing waiata, and there's no performance, there's no, goal. It's just to take time out of a week to practice our language and culture in a way that's joyful and useful, because anyone who has maybe gone along to a Māori event like a pōwhiri or gone along to a hui, any kind of, formal or informal event, waiata, Māori songs is a big part of it, and people get up and they sing after people speak, and they sing to open things and close things, and so it has a ceremonial meaning and context. And I think since I've been doing that, I've realised that I just love singing with other people and singing songs, and I'm getting a lot of joy out of that, and the feeling that I need to somehow go and make another record at the moment just isn't isn't there. So I'm actually not really making music at the moment. I'm just performing it and enjoying it.
Yeah. The reason why I started this project and why it's called Why Make Music is because, like many people, I am anxious and curious about our modern circumstance, which is to say that the climate emergency is intense and loneliness and isolation has proliferated throughout Western culture. Capitalism is at its end and it's getting extremely messy, and a lot of people are going to get hurt and a lot of people are suffering. And in that context, when the more you become, I guess, invested in the process of starting to unpack some of that and understand it and talk about it and start up dialogue around it, which is, that's what we have to do. I guess I just found myself thinking about music and how does it even fit in, kind of without, not necessarily like too self-critically. I don't want it to necessarily seem like I've just been like, self-flagellating about it, but just looking at some of my own musical practice and just music practice in general and just going like, what is this? Is this actually helping? Is there any point doing this stuff, particularly if you're not going to get paid? I mean, yes, you can just do it because you love it, but is there more important things actually right now than just doing something because you love doing it? And I'm curious what your take is on all of that, because I do hear from people, like, spoiler alert, yes, like, we should keep making music. Musicians and artists have an extremely important role, it turns out, I think, in terms of facilitating positive change in the world right now. But it's funny how when you try and unpack that and have conversations about it, often it is about thinking about how music has functioned in Indigenous cultures and ancient cultures. And it's about remembering music's function not in a commercial context, like remembering how recent in the history of deep time the economy is, let alone Spotify or whatever. So what's your take on that? Do you find yourself thinking in that big picture much, or are you a bit more grounded than that?
Oh, no, I think everyone who is awake and living in the world and open to both the beauty and the devastating, heartbreaking pain has really thought about that. And there's actually a song on my last album, which came out in 2023, called Protest Song. And in that song, I really talk about, what use is a protest song? If I'm going to write music that has this sort of purpose and meaning to talk about, as Nina Simone said, our responsibility is to reflect the times that we live in as artists. And I love that she said our responsibility, not our role or something we should think about. And I guess, I then have to go, well, if I am writing these songs and, I have a pretty modest audience and what use is a protest song and what's the point of music? Why am I doing it? Mm. And I kind of talk about all sorts of things in the song. But I kind of come back to something that I think is relevant. And it's based on a quote by the prison abolitionist Mariam Kaba, who is really worth your time. And she says, hope is just a discipline. And so I kind of meditate on that and say, what use is a protest song if not to feel less alone? Hold my hand and pull me up. Hope is just a discipline. Every day I start again with my broken heart open. And I think that I've kind of let go of the idea that somehow I am going to save the world. But it doesn't mean that we can't care and advocate and speak to things. And I guess like a great example is on the weekend, I joined tens of thousands of people in this country alone, to march, to mark a year of genocide that we've all watched, on our phones. And it's been deeply distressing because we can see that no one is stopping it. And then that sets off a whole lot of thoughts and questions about the world that we've grown up in the West, and what we've been told, and all of the lies, and our own experience of growing up in a settler colony. There's no treaty. There's a lot that has never been set right because we started wrong. But I was marching with some of the crew from my Takatapui Tuesday Waiata group, and we were singing a Waiata by the late Hidini Melbourne, and it's called Ngā Iwi, and it's about uniting the people of the Pacific. And he gifted it to the people of New Caledonia, the Indigenous people, the Kanaki people. And it's about solidarity across the Pacific, which includes us, you, me, Maori, people here in so-called Australia. It's a huge region, even though all of our alliances are on the other side of the world, which is peculiar, but there's a whole history to that, as we know. But we were marching and we were singing this song, and it was really beautiful because just by coincidence, there were people marching around me that I knew. Like one of my band members just happened to be in front of me. Just some friends that, some of the crew just knew. They just happened to be all around us. And you just felt the music bring everyone together. Even though they didn't know the words, there was something going on in that moment. And what we were expressing was solidarity with, Indigenous people who are bearing the brunt of the violence of settler colonialism. And I think that I just tell that story because the purpose of music for me today, in such a troubled world, is just to let people know that they're not alone. Just to remind people, whether it's at a march, whether it's through a song, like, you're not alone. It's really scary. We're not heading in a good direction. It doesn't look like, this world is going to organise itself in time to make life for future generations the life that we've known here on these lands for the time that we've been here. So all I can think to do is to go toward that feeling.
Well said. There's so much there.
It's such a big question.
It is, but that is a big answer, but also extremely clear in so many ways. And anybody who experiences music in that physical way that you described, that your body warms and resonates, knows that it's true. I'll be straight up and say, I love and get a lot of value out of sitting in front of my computer alone for 5 hours working on a beat or something, right? So for me, there is an element of the creative process that is solitary, and many artists would agree that that's a really rewarding part of the process. But music is fundamentally a collaborative communal process. And when you talk about Dr. Anita Collins, who I spoke to a little while back, is a researcher and a neuroscientist who's all about music education. She's this amazing champion for music in schools, full of amazing little quotes and stats and stuff. But yeah, she reminded me that music is older than language. It is effectively one of the first ways that humans communicated. It predates language. So it was how we gathered and how we shared ideas before we even had words. So obviously that, even at a lizard brain fundamental level, that's in there in our minds. So that is why it feels so good to sing together in a choir, whatever it is you might be singing. And but also tied with that, it was so easy to visualize you and your friends at that march. And that idea of you are marching in solidarity and in common cause for something so horrific and such a devastating injustice, but the music is filling you with the potential of a better future through joy. You know, that idea of like, it's actually, you know, there's power in anger, but a lot of the time activism and advocacy comes through like having an element of pleasure to doing it, having some humor or having some way of lightening that heavy load. And, you know, music can play that role. Like music, it's really important that we have protest songs and that we have songwriters calling out what's happening and telling stories and preserving stories and archiving stories, but also that music is simply just something that can remind us that we're physical, bodily, connected, you know, meat bags, and make us feel good as we're marching and thinking about the horrible things in the world. Yeah, that was, thank you, Jen. So, and you know, so that was, how was the experience of the march? Like, can you imagine doing that march and not singing and what that would have felt like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a strength, you know, in connecting with your language and your culture, because it reminds you that you come through a line of people, you know, and those people have fought for you to be here. You know, they've fought for you to be in a position where you can learn your language again, a language that was, you know, outlawed. There was actually, just when we were talking before, there's a really great moment that happened that you probably would have seen across social media, where there was a mass haka that was done at Eden Park in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. And basically Aotearoa New Zealand was trying to get the world record back from France.
Right.
France had the record. But anyway, the French had done some like kooky haka. And it's really funny watching them do it because it's like, it's just out of context. Like they don't, you sort of forget that you kind of need to come from a culture to understand the context of what you're doing when you're doing a haka. Like it's not just a fun thing you do, you know.
Yeah, that's got ray gun breakdancing energy, the French haka, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's been interesting. That's a whole interesting conversation as well. But it was so cool because you just saw, like, you know, if people don't know what's been happening in Aotearoa New Zealand, there's been a right-wing government. They came into power last year and they've just repealed everything that, or I don't know what the right word is for our kind of legislation, but they've just rolled back decades upon decades of work that our elders have done to restore, you know, to the Māori, the language, you know, Māori housing, Māori education, you know, land, like all sorts of different issues, kaitiakitanga, looking after the land. And they're just introducing all of these hideous things, like the fast track bill, where they can just like push through legislation where they don't have to talk to local tribes about the land that they're going to extract from. Another one that they're now talking about is a referendum to like look back over the Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed by hundreds of chiefs, and maybe just like question it and adjust it a little bit.
Oh yeah,
you know,
maybe just have a look. Maybe I don't know, tweak around the edges of it or something. Yeah, okay.
Well, this is it, and they, you know, they're proposing a referendum.
Oh,
I wonder where they got that idea from.
My goodness. Okay.
So it's the same playbook, you know, and this wonderful thing that I have seen with the tangata whenua, the Māori, the people of those lands, is just going and doing a mass haka, you know, at one of our biggest, you know, Eden Park, one of the biggest arenas or whatever you want to call it, that rugby's played there.
Yeah.
And all sorts were there, Māori, Pākehā, you know, all sorts of people. And that's a powerful message because it's kotahitanga. It's like bringing everyone together, you know, and I think that's a lesson that I'm really learning is how do we bring everyone in? Because we're in a world where we're living in different realities. And it's really hard to have any kind of conversation or patience or compassion for each other, and to understand how people, have come to believe what they believe. And so I've really loved watching the Maori people over the last year just keep coming back with strength, and I think that's kind of, it's a little bit off topic. I don't know why I've gone there, but I think that's the message that's sort of starting to shape for me, is like, how do we use music to bring people together, to have conversations, to not feel all separate or left out, or, what does that look like? Yeah.
It's not off topic, by the way. It's like bang on topic, because essentially I fundamentally agree with you. I think in a world where the systems we live in do not provide space for that kind of thought and dialogue and imagination, it's actually more important than ever that artists are somewhat empowered, or even just sort of let off the chain to dream up different ways of doing things and remind everybody what it is to be human and what it is to be connected and to be a community and to be, to look after each other. When our social systems don't do that, then who do you turn to? You turn to your friends, and you turn to your family, and you turn to your local networks when you need help. And like imagining art as that is something that's going to come up a lot in these conversations, I think, as we keep talking. Yeah. I
mean, I listened to Anita's conversation and Elijah, and I feel like I think we're all doing the same work, which is like reimagining what the future of music looks like, right? Because we can see with late stage capitalism that it's not working. It doesn't matter how much we stamp our feet about Spotify or, touring, or how difficult it is. And I've been in that conundrum, for many years, trying to advocate for and make sure that artists are paid fairly, or, whatever, through education, through trying to pass along what I know by bringing people together to talk about it, try and work it out. And I'm kind of at a place now where I'm like, yeah, clearly we need to reimagine how things are done. And that's the task at hand. It's like, how do we continue to make music? And I think that, something that Elijah was saying is like, just making it for the enjoyment. Not everyone has to be a full-time musician making their wage from music. Like that, I'm not. I've never made my entire wage for music, and yet I've continued to put records out. I've had to do all sorts of other things, and that's actually probably been kind of good.
Yeah. You mentioned getting older. One of the benefits of getting older in the context of music is that you can draw on your own, what you have seen in your life, which speaking for me, is that very few people make money from music. Very few. And when I say very, like, people, sometimes when you say very few people go, okay, so it's not as many as I imagine. It's like, no, it's like literally no one. Like, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, we would often have conversations at the radio station, at Triple J and Double J, or even with people from outside the station, but internally as well, saying, like, all these Australian artists that we play on the radio every day, almost none of them, like, are making their money from these songs that we're playing. And, they're supplementing in some way. They've got a day job. They've got a job for when they're off tour. They've got, like they're making some money and then funneling it all back into their creative practice, like and yeah, even though I think there is a lot more like awareness of that now. Like it is starting to filter out there, and particularly like you've got a younger generation. This is my thesis, or maybe my hope, that there is a younger generation of artists coming through with, maybe, as you said before we started talking, nothing to lose, because it's so transparent to them. They don't actually need to go through the process that perhaps I did go through. I mean, you may have gone through a version of it where you had a bit of a like, oh, is it actually like this, is it? Oh, and you had to kind of unprogram some of the stuff you thought about I think there is a younger generation coming through that are like, oh no, we get it. This is fucked. And I don't even have to think about how I fit into that system because I can see so clearly that it's not an option. So the freedom that can come with that, as well as the despair and the confusion potentially. But yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find that? Because I know that you work with a lot of younger artists and have mentored so many over the years. Have you seen attitudes of younger artists shift? Are they more realistic? Are they driven by different things? Are they driven by sort of impact goals rather than career goals? Have you noticed anything?
Not really. I can't really speak to that with a whole lot of clarity. I think it really depends. It depends on the person and where they've come from and how they think about the world. I think everyone holds hope, don't they? That the music that they make is going to break through and they might be one of the lucky ones. I think we all start off with that thing of like knowing that the odds are kind of stacked against us, but you love it and you want to do it, and so you just give it everything. And then maybe there's a point where you've been doing it for a while and you know the industry and you can see the reality and you can kind of see where you sit. And I think for me, I think I kind of started to go, oh, okay, yeah, I see what my place is, here in this particular music world that I inhabit, and I'm happy with that. And I'm actually not really interested in trying to like become a huge big rock star that, tours all around the world 9 months of the year. And awesome for people who do, like, power to you. But it's not, there's just too much I need to do with my life. And I think that's the thing as well, Tim, is I'm actually at a point in my life where I'm like, life is short. I've done the whole releasing records and touring thing. It's been awesome. Like, I've been able to do some cool shit, like, started a record label with Courtney, ran that for years, huge community around that. I've played with awesome bands. I've loved all of my bands. I've had 3 bands. They've all been great to tour with and play with, and I've got to play, make records with awesome people in studios, and I've got all of the pleasure, of making the records and hearing them on the radio and playing them live and playing a show in America or playing a show in London, like these big moments when you live all the way down the other end of the world, being nominated for awards. Like, I've had a really very fortunate time, even though I haven't really made any money except to keep doing it. It's like an expensive hobby that I've been able to continue doing because I make enough money to make the next thing, and not go into debt.
Yes. Well, I want to talk about that actually. Although before I do, you are a rock star to many, Jen Cloher, including to my 11-year-old, who her favourite music, essentially, the things that she puts on repeat constantly are the Beths, just on any Beths album.
Great taste.
And specifically Mana Takatapui, your song from your last record, that she is obsessed with. That is
amazing.
An anthemic song. And so she will be, when I go home later today and I'm like, I spoke with Jen Cloher today, Matilda, she'll be absolutely stoked.
You'll be like the cool dad.
I'm really not the cool dad to my children. That's what happens with kids.
This is a funny thing. Like, this is the litmus test for the success of a song. I have had so many people, I'm talking like probably close to 100, say to me, either in a conversation like this, after a show with their child, over the internet, filming their children, all obsessed with that song.
Yeah.
They're obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
the melodies, that chorus, come on.
Melody
undeniable.
Gets in there, eh?
Yeah.
That's when when kids think your song's good, maybe you've written a good song.
Yeah. I had this question, we'll get back to it in a second, but I had this question in my back pocket for when I would next interview you on Double J, which is now not going to happen. But do you think that song is your Dave Dobbin moment?
It's so funny you should say that, because we were listening to Slice of Heaven somewhere over the weekend, I was over at my friend's house and we were like putting her IKEA furniture together because she's about to have a baby. Anyway, and that song came on and I was like, did you know Mana Takatapu was my attempt of writing Slice of Heaven?
I knew it.
But I was like trying to make it sort of queer and Maori, just the opposite, like straight Pākehā. I was like, let's like make it this instead.
I love it. Does Dave know, or is Dave with us?
Dave doesn't know. I think Dave is still with us.
Yes.
Maybe if I've never met Dave because I haven't really had a career in Aotearoa. I would have met him if I'd lived there. He was like the Paul Kelly of Aotearoa, I guess. But maybe I'll go up to him and be like, Dave, you've got to listen to my song. I ripped your song up.
Yeah. Apologies to anyone listening who is not familiar with the 80s classic Slice of Heaven from Dave Dobbin from the Foot Flats soundtrack. Shout out Foot Flats.
Such a good song.
It is actually genius, as is your song. Okay, so Jen, what I want to do now is, so I mentioned this at the start. I would encourage anyone listening, particularly if you're an artist who is releasing your own music, but even if you're not, even if you have a team or if you're just curious, go to Jen's Instagram, click the link in bio, and that's what they say, isn't it, Jen? Link in bio, and find your way to Jen's document that has been released called the DIY Releasing Music Handbook, which is just a Google Doc. I love that you've done this, Jen, and it's not surprising in any way, but it is such a generous contribution because it's not just tips on how best to get your music out, is actually just advice on how to exist as a human in music, which is not easy. And what I want to do is I want to quote some of your the koan, the kind of Zen quotes. You got many of them in this doc. So there's the thing I want to do. I want to quote them to you, but I actually want to hear you say them. So if I quote them to you, but I want you to say them back because I want to know what they feel like coming out of your voice. So here's the first one we're going to go with, which is, debt is really just the outcome of being vague. Can you say that?
Debt is really just the outcome of being vague. Yes.
Now, can you unpack that? Debt is the outcome of being vague, because you say in this document, as an artist, there are no rules except one. There is one rule, which is?
Don't go into debt, Tim. Don't go into debt. And only because I went into debt, and I mentioned that in the document, the handbook.
Yeah. How seriously did you go into debt?
Bad.
Yeah.
Bad enough. It was kind of like on my second album, and I tried to go too hard, too fast.
You just added up a whole bunch of costs trying to make the record. Yeah? Is that
And
a very common story.
I remember looking at my tax return or whatever at the end of that year, and I'd made $100,000 and I'd spent 110.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's not good. And I'd worked my ass off and paid everyone well enough. So, we weren't staying 5-star hotels, it was still budget touring, staying in bunks together. So, yeah, it was a real wake-up call. And I think debt is the number one killer of creative inspiration, because it tells you that the thing that you love doing is just always going to suck endlessly from you. It's just and the clarity piece really is, before you go into any project, whether it's a single, whether it's an EP, an album, a video clip, just sit down and work through the steps. Just write them down, sit with another bandmate and just see if there's any holes, and ask the questions that I've outlined in that document, and think about where you're going to get the money from, And I think also the other thing has been really trying to manage my expectations. And sometimes you can't make the work the way you want to, because and I think it's good, someone that I've always thought has played a really great game is Liz Stringer, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I bring her up is because she's just continued along making great songs. Her albums just get better and better. And she's just toured and played, you know, small venues all around these lands. And it's been a slow build. And she's never tried, to my eye, she may have a different story to tell. She's never tried to go beyond where she is. She's never tried to overreach. And it's sustainable business practice. That's what sustainable business practice looks like, is playing venues that will fill up, you know, and making records that you can afford to make.
Yeah.
And not trying to be some big guy, you know. And as a result, I feel like Liz Stringer is just on the precipice of her career.
Mm.
You know, she's made 6 studio albums. I think her 7th is out either probably early next year. And I think if things continue to move in the direction that they will undoubtedly move for Liz, that we won't be talking about Paul Kelly in 20 years. We'll be talking about Liz Stringer.
Yeah.
You know? And I mean that. I know it sounds crazy at this point in time, but that's the kind of artist that I think is actually going to rule, because they built it. They built it. No one else, no record label, no manager, no sugar daddy, no parents. Liz Stringer.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, like, my whole point in everything that I'm writing, everything I'm trying to communicate is, you know, get clear, get honest. And, you know, a big one that comes up for people is jealousy and envy. So a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about in this document is actually feelings, because feelings, right, and thoughts create the world we live in. Like, it's not spiritual. That's just a fact. If you walk around feeling like it's fucked and you're angry, you'll just get more of it. We've all seen it. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, like you're angry, you go down the road and you just attract other angry drivers.
Yeah.
It's just this weird law of attraction, right? So I just think that, you know, the jealousy and envy piece is, or all of the feelings I'm talking about is like, get honest, like, see where you're envious, own it, you know, and look at, you know, if you're pissed off that so-and-so is, you know, like touring all around America and being a legend, well, what are you prepared to do? What are you willing to do? Like, are you putting in that work? You know, and if you are, great. You know, you're doing everything you can, and then you just have to let it go.
Yeah.
And just accept, you know.
Yeah.
Just accept that whatever's happening for you is happening for a reason. And it could be because you're going to be the Liz Stringer. You know, like, it could be that your journey is meant to be slow and subtle and deep and interesting, as opposed to a flash in the pan. And, like, honestly, I mean, I've been around now for, you know, like I said, over 20 years. There's only a handful of people, if I look at people that were being played on Triple J or charting, or that are still doing it, that were my contemporaries when I started 20 years ago. There's only a small handful. Most people drop out along the way because it just gets too hard to sustain, because it was never sustainable in the first place.
That's it. And it's, when you mentioned sustainable business practice, to me it sounded more like sustainable, like sustainable psychologically is really what you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Because you mentioned also in this document this idea of being able to just exist in your present circumstance and value it for what it is. There's a tricky thing. I think I've had this conversation with a bunch of people who sometimes will interpret it as like, oh, so should I not have goals? Like, should I not dream big or have ambitions? And it's hard, because it is a bit of a weird magic trick balance where of course you're allowed to have goals and have dreams, and of course you're allowed to dream of playing that massive stage or having adoring fans, or like, we're all human beings, and part of what we're doing when we make music, the majority of us, is we're wanting connection. And so it's okay to dream about that in all its different forms. But if you can't sort of appreciate what's happening for you right now, then you're actually never going to be satisfied, because it turns out there's always another level. Like there's always another thing you can aim for. And you may relate to this or not, but one of the many things that I'm grateful for from a couple of decades of hovering around music is that I now have seen people go through all the different levels of the experience. Like I've seen the people do it at the quote unquote highest level, and I've seen the people, drop in and out, and the long grind. Like I've sort of seen all the different versions of it and have friends who have experienced all different versions of it. And I now see them all just dealing with the same human stuff, the same issues. Some might have more money than others. Some might have different jobs to others, but actually the concerns that they all still have about their art or just about their actual life are the same. So, but that's it's a handy thing that comes from getting older, perspective or wisdom or whatever you want to call it. And then you start you start finding the ladder to the rooftop, so you can start shouting it to everyone else, right? Yeah.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think that I'm really happy. There's nothing left that I need to do to feel good about myself as a songwriter and performer, which I wouldn't have been able to say 10 years ago. So that's just from having done it. I feel absolutely fulfilled. And, I get joy from playing to 100 people or 1,000 people. They're different experiences, but I still always want to offer the very best, But I think that the thing that, I didn't write this in the document because I wasn't really sort of talking about myself where I am now. I was kind of thinking more about what would be useful for someone who's maybe early in their career. But something that I feel now is, I guess that I've never stopped growing as a person. I feel like what I'm speaking to is relevant. It's relevant if you're 70 or 80 or if you're 18. And you see that in my audience. Like when you come to a show or like people often comment, it's very diverse, particularly in age. And I think for me, and I should add that into my metrics of success, I sort of talk about working with people of different ages and backgrounds, but also in your audience. And I think age is a big one because it shows you that whatever you're talking about is very human and people are relating to the themes, that you're talking about. And essentially, and you've probably had other artists say this in conversation with you, is, we live in a world now where you can have a niche, and that niche can be in Berlin, London, Portland. That's what I saw. I was like, I'd show up to places and I'd be like, my people. Go to Wellington in Aotearoa. This is like playing in Melbourne. And then you start to go, there's like all of these people around the world that just get what it is that I'm up to. And if you can create a big enough niche wherever you go, well, then you've got a sustainable music practice. Like you can tour to those places, I guess. And when I think of it in that way, it makes it feel so much more achievable than thinking about like, how am I going to like market and promote and what's my campaign strategy and like who's streaming the most in the world on Spotify, like all of that shit. I just don't actually know whether we can trust it.
Yeah.
It just feels so out there to me.
And imagining a version of your music practice where there's a small group of people in different cities who are all going to resonate with what you're doing is, to do that, you need to understand who you are, right? Like and come to terms with the fact that maybe who you are and the kind of music you're making and the kind of thing that you're really passionate about is actually going to appeal to a smaller group of people than what Olivia Rodrigo is doing, or Chapel Roan or whoever it might be at whatever moment, or even Radiohead or some other band that you idolize. Like, yeah, can be confronting for a lot of artists whose music is inevitably, like all of our music really is in some ways should be speaking to a community or a smaller group of people or a lookout, or however you want to put it. There's so many different great words for that. I want to talk with you forever, so I'm going to change my mind and say that yes, we will get married, Jen. But we're going to do this again. I hope you're okay with that, because there's so much more to say. Can I get you to do one more of the koans though? Because I had a few lined up and we've just run out of time, and this is a good one maybe to end on. No one is waiting to discover you. Discover yourself.
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it?
It's a good one.
I really realized, I just was like, oh, no one gives a shit. Like I used to think that there was like all of these people in the music industry, right? Whatever that is, all of these little small businesses just trying to survive. But, I'd created this whole idea that there was this music industry and they're waiting to discover me and to make me into a star, and maybe there is some aspect of that with like major labels still looking out there for whoever the next big pop star is, right? It's not a world that I've ever lived in. It's not, like you said, I'm not doing what Olivia Rodrigo or, Chapel Rowan's doing. But I think for me it was like discover yourself is like just do it. Just go and do it. Like people are like, oh, how do I do it? Just like do it. Make heaps of mistakes.
Yes.
Go to gigs every night of the week. There's heaps of free shit around. There's stuff down at the local pub. Like you're going to learn every time you watch something live. Just get in there. That's when I go into schools, like kind of uni situations or music schools that they can invite you in. I'm sure you've been in to tutor and whatever. I'm just like, you can sit here, but you're not going to learn about what it actually is to do. To do is to learn. So discovering yourself, that idea is like, I've just been through the process at the moment of working with an early career artist, and they've just recorded their first song and it's awesome. And I've seen them go through the process of what that means, writing it, recording it, working with a team, and now sitting there and enjoying it, enjoying that satisfaction of I made a thing and it's awesome and I get to listen to it and I get to play it to my family and my friends and I get to enjoy it for the rest of my life, And I think for me that's where I rest satisfaction from today, is in the doing of it. Whether other people like it or not, these days I don't really care. It's like, do I like it? Am I enjoying this process? Great. And so discovering yourself is just really about, taking some risks and not being frightened of putting yourself out there.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I would only add one thing to the just get out there and do it, which is if possible, do not do it on your own. Despite that it is really easy to do it on your own. It's this funny, music's in a funny moment where it's like, do it all yourself. You don't need anyone. Take your own photo, do your own mixing, get AI to do the mastering. Don't worry about it. You've got your computer, you can play every instrument. No worries. Like, as someone who has done all of it myself for a very long time, I probably didn't need to. And actually, as I've gotten older and I have now embedded that collaboration so deeply into my creative process, I just don't make anything on my own anymore. It's so much more fun, and I feel like I have a much more real support network around me than I did when I was starting. So whether it's actually artistic collaborators or it's just finding some people going through the same thing as you, who are trying to do the same thing and that you can talk honestly with and just speak in a very real way. Oh, how did you do it? How did you try it? Oh, okay. Yeah, did that work? No. Okay. Cool. Well, I tried this and that didn't work. All right. Well, what are we going to do next? I don't know. Maybe this. I think a lot of people have that, but some people don't. And it's easy to forget it. It's easy to kind of lose sight of the importance of peers and friends and connections. So, yeah.
No, I agree. And I think, music has always been about playing with people, to people.
Yeah.
Like that is in its essence the joy, is there's nothing better than playing with a band on a stage and enjoying it with other people. Wow, we're doing this thing together. It's what, you walk off stage and you're like, whoa, like, oh, that was the worst gig, and you get to all commiserate. Or you have the best time and you're all on a high, or you sort of look back on the funny things that happened when someone stuffed up a note, or, comfort someone if they're feeling absolutely, wretched. You're right. It is a joy that should be shared. And I think as far as collaborating in the studio, that's something that I really lent into on the last album. There was like over 25 other collaborators on that record. And it's just easier.
Yeah.
Because you've got other people who have mad skills who are just going to like make your songs better and bring things to them. And it's fun. And again, it's like you're in a studio all together, and it becomes, I think, for me, it becomes everyone's, like it's so sad if you don't get to share it. If that record, everyone's invested in it. And I wrote that as one of the metrics of success is like, do you have people, a community around you that are as invested in what you're making as you are, or close enough? That's so important. That is exactly the piece that you speak to, is like isolation is sad and lonely and unnecessary. And there are ways, as I outline in that document, that you can get out and do stuff, even if you have personal struggles, and we live in a world that, is full of barriers. So there are ways of being gentle as well about finding community and people to work with.
Jen, thank you.
Pleasure, Tim.
I'll see you at the wedding. Oh
my God, I can't wait. Where are we going to have our honeymoon?
Oh, what do you reckon? Where would you like to go?
I'd really like to go to Japan.
Yes.
I've not been. Have you been?
I have. I love Japan.
I knew you would have been.
Yeah, I've gone a couple of times, but it's been too long. So lock it in.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll try and pick up some of those cheap flights that come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Okay. Thanks.
You can